Our next speaker is Dr. Jorge Dyer. Dr. Dyer is an endocrinologist in Anápolis, Brazil, and a clinical researcher in diabetes at the Hospital Geral de Guiana. He is the president of the Goiás Spiritist Medical Association and has lectured throughout Brazil and Europe. Please welcome Dr. Jorge Dyer.
I'll follow my friend and colleague, Alessandra, and I will speak in Portuguese. It's more comfortable to me.
I would like to thank initially everyone for being here, and also the invitation by Sonia and Cicero, and say that it's a great joy to be able to be here and to see this beautiful, beautiful city here of the United States. And what Cicero asked me to talk about was the junction, the fusion of two topics, which is the process of healing process and endocrinology and the spirit, mind, body interaction and physical healing. Let's see if I am up to par with what he asked me to talk about. Actually, the objective of this lecture is to bring the solid base of biology, evolution of biology, by André Luiz. André Luiz is a spirit that used the mediumship of Chico Xavier to bring the most revolutionary concepts in terms of medicine. So what is endocrinology? Endocrinology started in the same year of the relativity theory, and are studying Starling, this doctor from Great Britain. He's a kind of a crazy look if you look at him, but he was a bright scientist, and in 1905 he described the chemical messengers or hormones. He used to core with the secretins, the heterohormones that we know to the day of today, that there are hundreds of them. And he describes hormones, and he is considered the father of endocrinology. Endocrinology in itself, it's a broad discipline, and it goes beyond to what is being said about it. I kind of summarized the definition of endocrinology, but we know that the action of a hormone goes beyond the synthesis, the action and the degradation in the receptor, because this discipline has been able to tell us a great deal about what happens to our body in several processes of a healthy body and a sick body. I'm sorry here, instead of types, I've mistyped the word types there. It says types of communication. Our second objective is to show that our physical body is actually a system of information. And we have this information, this process of communication that is exercised through through chemical receptors. We have the cells that has its own communication. We have the endocrine system, the nervous system, and the immune system. Here you have the cell membrane, and I look at this picture and I imagine as a ceiling of something, and below there we observe what happens. Before, we used to think that the cell membrane was simply a double layer of lipids with a proteic type of interface. Today we know that it comes not from outward to inward, but there are intelligent forces that comes from the cytoplasm. Hans Diers, that inspired from Germany, Dr. Sheldon just to describe what he called morphogenetic fields. And Sheldrick describes, and he disagrees with his colleagues. And Sheldrick and his colleague, he's still alive. He did not have contact with André Luiz's book called Evolution in Two Worlds, because André Luiz describes in this book that within the cytoplasm we have a great organizer, a cell organizer, a vital organizer of life. So the cell membrane, it works as if, according to Bruce Limpton, a smart chip. And we can see the receptors in the membrane that are in contact with the external world. Yeah, I have to really run through all of this. But the signaling, the hormonal signaling, we have this system as like feedback, a feedback type of system, and you have the glands that produce the hormones that will reach the target gland that will respond to the gland that produced that hormone, giving a positive signal or negative signal to increase or decrease the amount of hormone. I don't know if you can see this picture here on the right-hand side of the screen, how the production of the thyroid is controlled through a hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the thyroid gland. And with the evolution of knowledge, we know that there are certain types of communication that happen. We have the endocrine communication, where the chemical messenger will reach the target organ through the bloodstream. The paracrine communication, where this chemical communication go to neighbor cells through diffusion in the cell matrix. Then we have the autocrine communication, in which the hormone is produced by the cell. It leaves the cell. It's called exocytosis, and it occurs in the intracrine communication, where the hormone that is produced within the cell acts from the cytoplasm. It does not have to leave the cell to be able to modify something within the cell that produced the hormone. So each hormone or signaling substance has a specific receptor. The interaction of the hormone with its receptor triggers, if you remember the figure that I just showed, in the cell membrane, what comes out are receptors, and one of the receptor, be it a hormone or a cytokine, when it interacts with the receptor, it triggers a cascade type of mechanism, and the signal within the cell is amplified. It's highly intelligent, all the system. And within this mechanism, the objective is to interact within the cell and get to the genes. And when it gets to the genes, it induces to the production of a new protein through the gene transcription process. After the transcription of a new protein within the cell, the hormonal sign is there, is continued until there is use or storage of the protein. We cannot be giving here a physiology class because it's a little complex to be able to convey all this in a few minutes. But here we just want to see, to show when there is this communication, we have the amplification of the signal that will then get to the gene. And what we know is that in the process of signaling, or cell signaling of the cells and the organism as a whole, there is an interaction of the endocrine endocrine, nervous, and immune systems that interact together. It's an integrated system of communication. Who is the boss? Who communicates? Who sends the signal? In a second part, so that we can really talk about the case that I'm going to be sharing here with you, we see that endocrinology has a fundamental role in understanding cancer. Because there are certain factors in the development of cancer that will interfere from the cytoplasm within the cell that will influence the DNA. And this is what Dr. Petrillo said yesterday about epigenetics. Andrew Bird, who is one of the people that studied epigenetics a great deal, he says that there are several definitions for epigenetics, and we in botanics, we have several concepts. In agronomy, they are also very developed in epigenetics, and today we have in epigenetics that is a little more intelligent, smarter, where we can perceive some evidence that some factors that are non-physical can interfere within the development of certain ailments through direct action to the DNA. The Dr. Nobres and Dr. Paulo wrote a book called Life Triumphs. And that, with this book, they changed the way I faced some of the ailments. Marcelo, it was a boy who died it was a fire at home. A person from our SMA in Goiás, they were laying carpet on the floor, and all of a sudden the fire started, and his brother was able to come out alive, but Marcelo died. And Marcelo Vieira, this boy, through Chico Xavier's mediumship, he talked about his grandmother's disease, and she had a brain tumor, and his grandmother died after a great period of depression because she lost her daughter that was killed by her husband. So she developed this cancer, this brain tumor from then on. So how could a boy, a 7-year-old boy, know about all of this? Chico didn't know anything about the grandmother's death. One of the concepts that we have to understand is downward causation. Before we talk about downward causation, we have to talk about upward causation first, because today in science, in reductionism, through which we were able to conquer a lot for the medical science, we find limitations. If we want to understand this wonderful person, Abraham Lincoln, that is there on the top, we try to dissect him, to understand his organs, to understand his tissues, the molecules of his body, and we go to minimal processes, atomic and subatomic processes. But in the upward causation, we are not able to understand the human phenomenon. Donald Campbell, he was a brilliant scholar, American scholar. He coined the term upward causation, but according to Campbell, the upward causation, the factors that will get to this causation, they are random. There is no purpose, there is no intention, it's not seen. It's only a piece of information that is applied to the system. For instance, a theory that is being contested now, it's the caloric restriction will increase longevity. And this is a piece of information that is applied to the system, analyzing populations that went through caloric restriction. We were able to see that that population would live more. This is a random information that appeared in the system that had not a smart intention behind it. And now I'm going to copy Dr. Petrillo again. I'm going to be talking about Mary Bennett's study. Very, very interesting study in which she said that smiling cheerfully, really laughing, will increase the activity of natural killer lymphocytes. And in the study group that had about 33 students of the Indiana University, smiling happily and laughing increased the activity of these defense cells. And here is Mary Bennett's study, and you see the charts. The increase, the effect of really increasing the natural killing cell effect. And here is the effect on what has to do with stress hormones. It really reduces the stress hormones. The psychoneuroimmunology experiments, and this is also by Dr. Bennett, it demonstrates that an intention able to modify the response of several systems. And we see, and this is an example that I took as a downward causation, to laugh, to smile cheerfully. With this intention, you can really modify, release, relax your body. You should smile. You should be able to relax and smile more, because then you're going to really change your system. And we see that the causation was something intentional. This article by Mario Burregar is very interesting because of one of the conclusions that it brings about. The way that the person experiences the world determines some of this person's physiological responsible, neurohormonal, immunological languages. It's a specific language for each one of the systems. But what is more important, and he reads in English, the way a person experiences the world, it's a description that in which he uses I, first-person description. It's an individual response from each one of the systems involved. This is the spirit, André Luiz. In 1905, he was still alive when endocrinology initiated. And in the spiritual world, André Luiz, may I speak about Carlos Chagas? No. Okay, I won't speak about that. But André Luiz brings some of these concepts in the book by André Luiz through the mediumship of Chico Xavier, Evolution in Two Worlds. Such hormones born from the mechanical impulse of the mind over the cell empire, according to different emotional states of the consciousness, bundling loads of chemical elements in the optimal level when the inner balance presides over the manifestation and interior modifications, and thereby consolidating resources for maintenance and preservation of normal life, perfectly isolatable by ordinary science.
Ele vai falar de
He
hormônios
will be
que
talking
surgem
about
do
hormones
impulso
that
do
come from the
império da
mechanical
mente sobre o
impulse
império
of the mind
celular.
over the cell
E a
empire.
gente viu algum
And
trabalho da
we
Mary
saw Mary Bennett in her
onde
study
há uma regulação
where
de hormônios
she
quando se sorri
does
alegremente.
regulation of the hormones when you smile cheerfully, when you laugh. It's the mind working over this cell empire. And he wrote this book in 1958.
Nós temos todos corpo espiritual.
We all have our spiritual
Nós
body,
temos sistema
and we all have
de informações.
an information system.
Claude Transmontant, filósofo
Claude
e teólogo
Transmontant,
francês,
he was a
vai dizer que
theologian
dá
from France,
a
and a
essa
scholar from France.
múltipla
He says that what gives a multitude
esses múltiplos elementos
of
discordantes
discordant elements
numa unidade,
in
uma
organic
estrutura
unity,
subsistente,
a
é a
subsistent
forma.
structure
E
is
aqui
the
resgata o
form,
conceito
and this is a
aristotélico de
concept
forma.
by Aristotle.
E é essa forma, essa ligação que
And
faz
this
que essa
bond is
multitude
responsible,
se transforme em uma
makes this
unidade
multitude
essencial.
into an essential unity.
Claude Bernard, o pai da
Claude
fisiologia
Bernard,
moderna,
the
ele
father
diz que o
of his
corpo
modern
é
physiology, he says
informado
that the body
por uma
is
ideia criativa.
informed by a
E
creative
nós
idea.
aprendemos que a biologia
And we
evolutiva de
learned
André
with
Luiz,
the
o
evolution
corpo
of
espiritual
biology of
é a
André Luiz
ideia
that the
criativa
spiritual body is the creative idea
não só
of the
criativa,
somatic
mas
body,
também
not only
criadora.
creative but also creator.
E André Luiz define o corpo
And
espiritual como um
André
veículo de
Luiz
células
defines
elétricas,
the body as a vehicle of
que nós
electric
podemos definir
cells,
como campo
which we
eletromagnético
can define as an electromagnetic field in which thought vibrates in a closed circuit. André Luiz defines the perispirit, the spiritual body, as a great circuit where thought is constantly circulating.
Então nós temos alguns níveis,
So we have
ou dois grandes níveis
two
hierárquicos
hierarchical
dessa interação.
levels of this great interaction in spiritual body and brain, spiritual body, cells, and organs. These are the two. Number
A
one
interação do corpo espiritual com o cérebro
is spiritual body and
responsável pelo
brain
fenômeno
that's
da consciência.
responsible for the phenomenon of consciousness,
E o corpo
the
espiritual
process
interage
of
com as células,
thought, and the spiritual
com os
body
órgãos, é
and
responsável
interacting
pela
with cells
nossa
and organs,
homeostase.
we have homeostasis.
No fenômeno da consciência, a
And
interação do
the
corpo espiritual
phenomenon of consciousness, interaction of the spiritual body at the level of cytoplasm, specifically
as
with the
turbinas.
tubulins.
E aí é o conceito
And
maravilhoso
here is the beautiful
da
concept
Cameron
of
Penrose.
Hamilton and Penrose.
Eles são
They are
responsáveis
responsible
por uma interação quântica,
for a
essa
quantum interaction
interação do corpo espiritual.
of this spiritual body.
Hei de ousar
And I will dare to supplement the vision of Penrose when he said
é o corpo
that
mental
it is the mental body, the one responsible for the consciousness, the one that gives us individuality, which makes us a separate being, an individual, and responsible for what we are externally. And this interaction between the spiritual body and the cytoplasm through the tubulins is a quantum interaction, and the homeostasis results from the interaction of the spiritual body with the physical body through the power centers, all of them commanded by the coronary chakra or power center, and the automatic stimuli of the spiritual body are translated
numa espécie
into
de tradução
neural,
para uma linguagem neural,
hormonal, and
e
immunological languages.
E o que nos faz também
And what
perguntar
makes us
seria a pineal,
think
a
and
sede da
ask,
consciência?
would be the pineal gland the headquarters of consciousness? Because this
Ou
is
pelo menos
a statement made by
base de algumas evidências.
André Luiz, we go after the evidence. In a study dated 1975 by Daniel Cardinale, a brilliant Argentina, it shows that melatonin, that it was a hormone that isolated by Lerner in 1971, I believe it was. 58, actually, 1958. Melatonin actively interacts in the metabolism of tubulins. Cardinale had no notion about the tubulins. The only thing that he knew that it was that was responsible for the shape of the cells. Into this speculation, the cells of the pineal gland, it has a very similar shape as the neurons, and it's star-shaped, and it's distributed in groups or sets. It have numerous microtubules, and it has a smooth endoplasmic reticulum and a few small granules. And it produces melatonin and other hormones. It has a plethora of receptors for all the neurotransmitters and peptides. Dr. Daniel Cardinale, he demonstrated the pinealocytes have receptors for all pituitary hormones, and it can be considered the pineal gland is a model of integrative process in neuroendocrinology. And here we also see that the receptors for the melatonin, which is the hormone produced by the pineal gland, is distributed throughout the brain. And melatonin has some actions that go beyond the chronobiology and sleep induction. It has a direct effect on the mitochondria because it gets rid of the free radicals, and it prevents phosphorylation of the microtubules. And what does that mean? It means that all the memory process and learning process, it happens through the phosphorylation process of the microtubules. And the melatonin, it regulates this phosphorylation process, and it has an oncostatic effect. So all of this together makes us say, and state, that the pineal gland, according to the Spiritist revelation, according to André Luiz, this bright spirit, is really the headquarters of consciousness. And how does that happen? Would be a second lecture altogether. Talking about the healing process. What's interesting is that this article that was written by Zachary, he says that the spiritual healing methods were not effective in inhibiting in vitro proliferation of tumor cells. But in more than 80% of the cases of spontaneous healing of various types of cancer, patients said that they searched for it, they looked for some sort of unconventional and spiritual method to be cured. So it's no use of science says it doesn't work, because 80% of the patients will look for these unconventional and spiritual methods, healing methods. And this is a very interesting case. And I apologize ahead of time because I don't have images, I don't have pictures here. It was a 65-year-old patient that was diagnosed with pancreatic adenocarcinoma, and that with lymph nodes and peritoneal metastasis. and he was taken to surgery in 2004. He was open, and the surgeon opened his body and closed his body and sent him to chemotherapy and told the family that he would not live past 6 months. So instead of going to chemotherapy, when he left the hospital, he looked for a Spiritist center and close to Brasilia, and he started with the passes, the Spiritist passes. That was in 2004. I lost the picture and I couldn't show it to you, but he does not want to see the tumor, and he does not want to go through a CAT scan again. He is still alive 8 years later. He's still taking his passes every week. I had access to antigen CA19-9. He accepts to do the blood work because he says that the blood work, the doctor reads, but he doesn't read. He does not want to look at the tumor on a chart or in a CAT scan because and there was an answer because you can see that its antigen is lower, much lower. And another case of adenocarcinoma of the pancreas is a pastor. He's from a pastor of evangelical pastor of an evangelic church, and he was sent to surgery. Both of these patients were with me because they had a problem with glucose and glycemic index, and they went home, and this person he prayed, and he heard of this voice, this inner voice, saying that he was going to be cured if he would persist with his faith. He did not look for an oncologist. He was true to his faith. He's still alive. He has no liver problems. And there is no evidence that the disease increased. His blood work improved a great deal. He's controlling with diet, his condition with diet. So then we start asking about what is the spiritual energy, and it's different from what we think of energy is, but this spiritual energy is able to interact with the complex energy. We sometimes think of the chi, the prana, and Spiritism translates in a proper language, calling this spiritual energy fluids. And these fluids or spiritual energy, they interact directly with the patient's mental body that transmits information to the psychosoma and to the physical body. Actually, these fluids, this spiritual energy, is a vehicle of our consciousness, our mind, our thoughts to act on the psychosoma, which is the external layer of the spirit and the physical body, in a process that's called downward causation. And here we see this in a chart. The spiritual energy acting on the mental body, and that looks for resources within resources. I'm not going to spend my last 10 minutes on this, but I just want to say that from the spiritual energy you come to the mental body, and then you go on to the psychosoma and the physical body, and we try to explain here how a pass would work, and that will interact with the physical body, and it will depend a great deal on the patient patient's faith to assimilate all this energy. And when this fluid, when this spiritual energy gets to the physical body, it can then act in some somatic levels. André Luiz, in this revolutionary book called Evolution in Two Worlds, it says that the spiritual body is connected through the physical bodies to the cytoplasm, and that the mitochondria had a fundamental role. They receive direct impulse from the mental body. What does the mitochondria do? What are the little organs that we have within ourselves? We have close to 300 mitochondria in cell. And a hepatocyte, which is the cell contained in the liver, has up to 1,000 mitochondria per cell. And this little organ that has its own DNA has two layers, and between these two layers there is a current circulating up to 170 millivolts, and we have like a plant that is very, very powerful than any other energy producing plant within ourselves. According to André Luiz, the mental body sends impulses straight to the mitochondria in the cells. And what do? In addition to giving us life, because they are fundamental and paramount to the respiratory cycle of the cells, they are also connected to the survival of the cell. The process of the programmed death, or called apoptosis, is regulated through mechanisms that are initiated in the mitochondria. And through these enzymatic reactions with some of the proteins of caspases, the family of caspases, which are very abundant within the mitochondria, and which is very, very interesting, is that there is a direct relationship between the mitochondria and the tubulins. So the challenge is to try to understand. Everything is in a very speculative field. I'm not a scientist as Giancarlo. We have to recognize that Giancarlo is one of the brightest scientific. He's really a monster. He publishes and publishes and publishes, and he's a bright mind, and everything that we have in the SMA in Brazil, we owe to him, to Giancarlo and to Alexandra. Since I'm not committed to those studies, I dare to speculate. So up to which point the mental body and the mitochondria and the relationship to the tubulins and the apoptosis process, why can't we link that to the theory of Hameroff and Primrose? We do this link, and this interaction of the spirit, it gets to the physical body through the pineal gland and through the transmission of a quantum interaction that's non-local in nature. It will get to the brain. So in the physical body, there is a relationship with the mitochondria, and we believe that this is a positive relation, because the mitochondria will regulate the life of our cells. So our spiritual healing through the past will then happen, according to our opinion, from the assimilation of these spiritual energies, or through the mental body, that will then transmit those to the psychosoma and the physical body, and it will act directly in the cells, in the mitochondria themselves, thereby regulating the apoptosis process, or the death of the programmed death of the cells, and also act in the immunological system, increasing thereby the defense cells. So I talked too much. This is what I try to explain. That spiritual healing can be understood as a return to the normal homeostasis, and it occurs by using the physiological resources of the patient from the action of the spiritual fluids or spiritual energy on his or her subtle body, which is the perispirit. The nervous, the endocrine, and immune systems respond to the stimuli from the subtle body, translating these stimuli in neural and endocrine and immune languages. And the spiritual energy or these fluids circulate through the power centers or chakras. Here you can see the chakras in this depiction. And André Luiz, he disagrees a little bit from the Oriental tradition in saying that we have a very important chakra called the splenic chakra, and we can understand from the spleen, the role of the spleen, how important the splenic chakra is important. It's it's a secondary one considered in the Oriental medicine. And I'm old. I've been practicing for 20 years. I feel old, and I have been following some cases through spiritual healing, through prayers and passes. And what I can say is that the physical body assimilates the energy. It has this ability to assimilate energies, and I speculate the mechanism in my previous slides, and it finds cure within itself. And how we can reach the true healing, the true cure. I learned a great deal by being the death messenger in 4 years of as a resident of medicine. When a patient was about to die, and it was my turn to be working. It was my shift. I was the one by the patient's side, and also it was my role to give the family members the news about the death. So I was there with these patients, and although these patients sometimes are not in my clinic, some of my colleagues, because I had that vast experience, they used to call me to do exactly what I did, be there with the patient and with the family members. And these patients would come to me and tell me that they were still alive and they were cured after death. And I was in my office and I saw a patient. I was hearing his heart, and then Miss Flora was a patient that I saw, and she had died 3 months before, and I sensed her presence, and I couldn't help but cry, and I cried, and the patient that was hearing the heartbeat was seeing me there, with taking his heartbeat, said, he started crying too, because he thought that he was too bad. But this process of dying, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she described that this goes through, the healing process goes through after you die. And mediumship has helped us understand this. And this was the message that I wanted to leave with you. And I would like once more to thank for the invitation to speak here and to face this challenge. And I apologize because I didn't speak English. I really saved you from my bad English. That's why I spoke in Portuguese. And I would like to thank you and invite you that have a Facebook access and face the AMI Goiás page. Thank you very much.